Most men are harmless. They have been softened by comfort and conditioned to seek approval. Their instincts have been trimmed away little by little until nothing sharp remains. Their claws have been filed down, their teeth replaced with polite smiles. They enter a room and nothing changes. The energy remains the same. Conversations continue without pause. When they speak, people talk over them. When they show anger, it is dismissed like background noise. They are safe, predictable, manageable. But every now and then you encounter another type of man, a rare type, an anomaly. You have seen him before. Maybe you've even felt his presence without fully understanding it. He doesn't need to raise his voice to command attention. He doesn't need to display dominance in obvious ways. He simply walks into the room and something shifts. The atmosphere tightens. The chaos becomes quieter, not because people respect him, but because something older and more instinctive awakens in the room. A primal awareness. Niccolò Machiavelli, the man who wrote what many consider the ultimate handbook on power, never wrote his ideas for harmless men. He wrote for men capable of wielding power, men who understood the brutal realities of human nature. Because Machiavelli understood something most people refuse to admit. In a world full of wolves, choosing to remain a sheep is not morality. It is self-destruction. If this video found you, it is probably because something inside you has started to shift. You are beginning to feel uncomfortable inside the role you were given, the role of the agreeable man. The harmless man, the man who keeps everyone comfortable while quietly abandoning himself. Something inside you is changing. Something harder, something colder, something far more dangerous. But before we go further, we need to define what that word actually means. Dangerous does not mean violent. Violence is what happens when a weak man loses control. True danger is something else entirely. It is silent, stable, immovable, like an iceberg drifting beneath calm water. You cannot see most of it, but its presence alone can destroy ships. A dangerous man is a man who cannot easily be manipulated. He cannot be guilt-tripped. He cannot be shamed into submission. He cannot be pressured into abandoning his own path, because he knows exactly who he is, and a man who knows himself becomes the most powerful person in any room he enters. If you are watching this, it may be because you are shedding an older version of yourself, the people-pleasing version, the version that tried to be liked by everyone, and that transformation is not comfortable. It feels like something inside you is dying. In many ways it is. The old identity begins to dissolve. You might even worry that you are becoming cold, detached, maybe even cruel, but that is not what is happening. You are waking up. Machiavelli described this transformation using a concept called virtue. Not virtue in the modern sense of moral purity, but in the ancient sense, strength, capability, effectiveness. The ability to look directly at reality, even when that reality is harsh, chaotic, or ruthless, and still navigate it with precision. Today, we are going to examine 7 signs that you are crossing this threshold, 7 signals that you are becoming the kind of man Machiavelli understood. A man others quietly watch, a man others cannot easily control, but be warned, this is not a collection of life tips. This is a psychological diagnosis, a map of the shadow, and there is a final stage to this transformation. A stage I will reveal at the end, the hidden cost, the price that comes with seeing the world this clearly. Many men reach that point and retreat. They choose comfort instead of power. The question is, will you? Let's begin. Sign number 1, the death of the approval addict. The first change is usually the most painful. Your need to be liked begins to fade. Most men grow up believing that kindness will earn them rewards from the world. Be agreeable, be accommodating, keep everyone happy, and life will return the favor. But at some point you start examining the evidence. You look around and you realize something uncomfortable. The nicest man in the room is rarely the most respected. Because much of what we call niceness is not generosity, it is fear. Fear of confrontation, fear of rejection, fear of disapproval. The agreeable man bends himself into whatever shape the room requires, not because he chooses to, but because he is afraid not to. This is where the shift begins. You stop confusing goodness with weakness. Machiavelli famously wrote that it is often safer for a ruler to be feared than loved, not because fear is noble, but because love is fragile. Love depends on loyalty, and loyalty often disappears the moment it becomes inconvenient. Fear, however, is sustained by consequences. It remains stable. This realization changes something inside you. You stop chasing approval. Instead, you begin demanding respect. Your no becomes heavier. In the past, when someone asked you for something you didn't want to give, you would soften the refusal. You would apologize. You would invent excuses. Now the answer is simple: no, without explanation, without guilt. You understand that your time, energy, and attention are resources, and you are no longer handing them away to anyone who asks. This unsettles people. They say you have changed. They say you used to be more helpful. But what they really mean is that you used to be easier to use. This is the beginning of strategic hardness. You are not seeking to hurt people, but you are willing to make difficult decisions when necessary. You stop avoiding uncomfortable conversations. You stop tolerating relationships that drain you. You remove manipulative people from your life quietly and decisively, like a surgeon removing infected tissue. No drama, no theatrics, just distance. This is the moment a man begins to govern himself. And a man who governs himself cannot be easily ruled by others. Sign number 2, emotional stillness. The second sign appears in how you react to chaos. The average person is reactive. They are controlled by whatever stimulus appears in front of them. Traffic creates rage, criticism creates panic, rejection creates despair. They are constantly pulled in different directions by external events. But something begins to change inside you. A gap appears between the event and your reaction. Instead of responding instantly, you pause. You observe. You analyze. Machiavelli described power using the metaphor of the lion and the fox. The lion represents raw strength. But strength alone is not enough. The fox survives because it understands traps. You begin developing this fox-like awareness. Your emotions still exist, but they no longer control you. You treat them like signals on a dashboard. Information, not commands. If anger appears, you notice it. If fear appears, you acknowledge it, but you do not surrender your behavior to it. This calmness frustrates manipulators because manipulation depends on reaction. They provoke, they insult. They attempt to trigger emotional responses, but when you remain composed, their strategy collapses. You become difficult to control, a mirror instead of a sponge. You reflect behavior back without absorbing it. And this emotional discipline becomes one of your greatest sources of strength. Sign number 3, the collapse of pedestals. Another transformation occurs in how you view other people. As children, we look upward, we idolize. Parents, leaders, celebrities, romantic partners. We imagine they possess special wisdom or authority. But over time you begin noticing the cracks. The father you once saw as invincible becomes simply a man with flaws. The powerful politician becomes an ambitious human being chasing influence. The billionaire becomes someone who benefited from both skill and circumstance. And the person you once idealized romantically becomes human, not perfect, not sacred, just human. This process is called desacralization. You stop worshipping people, not because you hate them, but because you see them clearly. Machiavelli did this with political power. He stripped away the illusion that kings ruled by divine authority. He saw rulers as individuals navigating incentives, ambitions, and fears. When you remove people from pedestals, something remarkable happens. You stop feeling inferior. You start interacting with them as equals. You can negotiate, challenge, outmaneuver. You cannot compete with a god, but you can compete with another human being, and that realization fundamentally changes how you move through the world. Sign number 4, strategic silence. In a world obsessed with broadcasting, silence becomes power. Modern culture encourages constant expression. People announce their plans, their emotions, their victories, their struggles. Everything is shared instantly. But as you become more disciplined, you begin withdrawing from this noise. You stop announcing your intentions. You stop explaining every thought. You stop seeking validation through constant visibility. Instead, you work quietly. You build in private. You allow results to speak later. This silence makes people uneasy, because when someone speaks constantly, they reveal their mind. But when someone remains quiet, the imagination of others fills the space. Mystery creates psychological gravity. In negotiations, the person who talks less often gains more information. Listening becomes a strategic advantage. And gradually, you become comfortable with withholding your plans until they are already in motion. Not because you are secretive for its own sake, but because focus requires privacy, noise dissipates energy, silence concentrates it. Sign number 5, the controlled monster. One of the most misunderstood transformations involves aggression. For years, many men suppress their darker impulses. They believe being civilized means eliminating anger, ambition, or competitiveness. But repression does not eliminate these forces. It only buries them. Eventually, you begin acknowledging them instead. You realize that aggression can be directed. Strength can be cultivated. This often manifests physically. You begin training, lifting, learning combat sports, developing discipline in the body, not because you seek violence, but because capability changes psychology. A man who knows he can defend himself behaves differently from a man who cannot. He becomes calmer, less reactive, less desperate to prove himself. True strength removes the need for constant displays of strength. This is what Carl Jung called integrating the shadow, accepting the darker parts of your nature and placing them under conscious control. A controlled monster is far more valuable than a harmless servant. Sign number 6, ruthless focus. As this transformation continues, your relationship with time changes. You begin noticing how much of modern life is designed to waste attention. Endless scrolling, endless entertainment, endless distractions. Most people drift through these currents unconsciously. But you start becoming selective. Before committing time to something, you ask a simple question. Does this strengthen me or weaken me? Activities that drain your focus begin disappearing from your life. arguments that lead nowhere, news cycles designed to provoke anxiety, social obligations that exist only out of habit. You begin concentrating your effort like a laser. And while others scatter their energy across countless distractions, you invest yours in building skills, knowledge, and opportunities. Over time, the results compound, and the gap between focused individuals and distracted ones becomes enormous. Sign number 7, solitude without fear. The final sign is acceptance of solitude. As your priorities shift, your social environment often changes. Some relationships fade, some friendships weaken, not out of hostility, but because your paths no longer align. Many people are terrified of being alone. They require constant company to escape their own thoughts. But you begin discovering something different. Solitude becomes productive. It becomes restorative. Your clearest thinking happens there. Your strongest decisions emerge there. Instead of fearing silence, you start protecting it. Because that silence becomes the place where your identity strengthens. You realize that independence is not isolation. It is self-sufficiency. You welcome relationships, but you do not depend on them to define you. And when a man reaches that level of inner independence, social pressure loses its power over him. But now we arrive at the hidden stage, the one I mentioned at the beginning, the sign number 0, the price. Once you begin seeing the world through this lens, power dynamics, incentives, strategy, you cannot return to ignorance. You start noticing patterns everywhere. You see manipulation more clearly. You recognize hidden motivations. You analyze situations instinctively. And while this awareness gives you power, it also removes certain illusions. The comfortable simplicity many people leave inside disappears. You trade innocence for clarity, and clarity is heavier to carry. But it is also liberating, because the world does not need more obedient sheep. It needs individuals capable of confronting chaos and bringing structure to it. Not tyrants, not monsters, but men capable of strength, men capable of responsibility, men capable of leadership. In other words, men capable of becoming kings of their own lives. And that brings us to the final truth. The hidden stage, the sign number 0, the cost of this transformation, because every form of power demands a price. Once you begin seeing the world through this lens, through patterns of influence, incentives, psychology, and strategy, you cannot return to the old state of innocence. You cannot unknow what you now understand. You begin to notice things most people never see. You see how people subtly test boundaries. You see how status silently shapes conversations. You see how approval, fear, and attention move beneath almost every human interaction. You start recognizing manipulation the moment it appears. You begin reading the room in ways you never did before. A pause in someone's voice, a shift in body language, a hidden motive behind a friendly smile. And while this awareness makes you sharper, it also changes how you experience the world. The comfortable illusion that everything is simple disappears. You realize that much of society runs on quiet games of influence and perception. Many people prefer not to see this. They choose comfort. They choose ignorance. They choose to remain inside the story they were given. And there is nothing wrong with that. But once your eyes open, you cannot force them closed again. You will always analyze. You will always observe. You will always notice the invisible dynamics beneath the surface. At first, this realization can feel isolating. It may even feel heavy, because awareness creates responsibility. You begin understanding that strength is not just about protecting yourself. It is about knowing when to stand firm, when to act, and when to guide others who are still lost in the noise. But over time, something interesting happens. The burden transforms into clarity. The chaos that once overwhelmed you becomes easier to navigate. You stop reacting blindly to circumstances. Instead, you start shaping them. You become deliberate, strategic, grounded. The world stops feeling like a storm pushing you in random directions and starts feeling more like a chessboard. Not a battlefield of constant conflict, but a field of decisions, positioning, and patience. This is what true power looks like. Not domination, not cruelty, but mastery over yourself, because the man who cannot control himself will never control his destiny, and the man who fears standing alone will always be controlled by the crowd. But the man who understands his own mind, who can sit in silence without panic, who can observe without reacting, who can act without needing applause, that man becomes something rare. Something stable, something powerful, not a monster, not a tyrant, but a sovereign individual, a man who carries his own gravity. The world does not need more men who drift with the wind. It has enough of those already. What it lacks are men who can stand steady when chaos rises. Men who can bring order to their own lives first, then extend that stability outward. Men who build instead of beg. Men who lead instead of follow. Men who understand the darkness inside them, yet choose discipline over destruction. In other words, men capable of ruling their own inner kingdom. And when a man truly becomes the king of himself, the world around him begins to change.